Hello everyone. Today we are going to have a sessions on audit sampling. So here I'm going to share with you the audit sampling. Audit sampling is very important because we need to sample our evidence, and we are not able to collect every evidence for every transaction due to time constraint, due to resources constraint. That's why we need to do audit sampling. It is very important to have a very proper audit sampling because it actually affect our quality of audit work, and also of course when we our audit sampling is not correct, therefore it increase the risk of detection risks, and of course consequently it will affect the audit risks. So we might have a risk of wrong audit opinion due to wrong audit sampling. So let us start off what our learning objective for this particular session. Here you after the end of the session you should be able to explain what is you must be able to explain what is audit sampling, and also the type of audit sampling, as well as the classification of audit sampling. Okay, now according to the ISA 500, okay, audit sampling is related to audit evidence where the auditor are required to collect sufficient appropriate evidence for them to be able to draw reasonable conclusion. Okay, because audit evidence is used as a base for us to perform the audit opinion. Okay, as such, okay, however, informing the opinion, the auditor does not examine all the information available. Okay, here because the conclusion can be only reached by the sampling approach, as we cannot check everything, every single transaction, because of the volume of the transaction is very high. That's why we need to use sampling approaches. Okay, meaning that we are not actually in testing 100%. That's why we need to do sampling. Now, what is audit sampling? Okay, let us see what is audit sampling. Okay, audit sampling according to ISA designed as a procedure of getting evidence to less than 100% of items within the account. This is what is audit sampling. So when we do we collect evidence, we check less than 100%. This is where we need sampling. Why? It's very important for us for audit sampling to for auditors to help auditor to express opinion. So that is include the testing, include a process of examining the test audit work based on a sampling basis. Okay, so how is being conducted? It can be done whether it's statistical audit sampling or non-statistical. Okay, this we are going to go into detail what is statistical, what is non-statistical. Okay, now let us say, okay, however, audit sampling actually varies among firm. Okay, all right. Okay, one is variety of usage is vary between audit firm. You cannot use the same audit sampling. If we have an audit plan for firm A, you cannot use that particular sampling for firm B, unless these two are very similar firm. You can just do some adjustment about the audit sampling. However, that will not happen. All right. So second common approach is a random sampling, and maybe there are some other tests of hundreds of audit sampling. Okay, and then but it is always based on industry, on the level of materiality and everything. So there are a lot of things that are there that you need to consider before we decide the audit sampling. Okay, again, there are two types of however sampling actually is not we cannot avoid sampling risks. Okay, because risks of our sample is being wrongly conducted. So there are two types of sampling risks. One is in the compliant test or test of control. The other one is sampling risk in the substantive test. Okay, so number one, type 1 risk of the compliant of test of control, risk of assessing control is too high. Okay, this is the risk that the auditor will conclude that the risk is higher than actually is. Okay, sometimes due to wrong sampling method, maybe we can said that our control risk, there is wrong, we wrongly assess the control risk. Okay, maybe it's too high or maybe it is too low. All right, this is during the compliance test or control risk. Whereas on the substantive test, there are two types, type 1 and type 2. The risk that the auditor will conclude there is a material error. Okay, one there is not actually exists. The other one, if of course the auditor conclude there is no material error, however it does exist. So these are the sampling risks that we can anticipate in audit. So one is a compliance or test control part. Maybe we what we call, we conclude that the control risk is too high or too low. Maybe for sensitive, maybe the risk of that is material misstatement, or the risk of you say that is no material misstatement. Okay, non-sampling risks. Okay, non-sampling risks refer to the factor that cause auditors to reach a conclusion other than sampling size. So, for example, here the auditor rely on other representation and erroneous information. They're just making decision not based on sample. So, for example, like a interpretation of evidence, human mistakes such as failing to recognize errors in documents and applying auditing procedure and appropriate audit objective. So non-sampling risk can never be mathematically measured. However, to keep this risk to minimum level, so a proper planning and supervision and adhere to the quality of control standard is very, very important. All right. Now, the types of sampling, as I said just now, we can use statistical sampling or non-statistical sampling. Statistical sampling is probabilistic sampling. So we base on how the probability of something happens. So based on is so-called probabilistic sampling, whereas non-statistical sampling is a non-probabilistic or based on judgment sampling. Okay, it's depend on the auditor how many they want to get the evidence. Or statistical is based on certain calculations. Okay, now there are several types of probabilistic sampling. Okay, so the most commonly used is random selection of sample. Okay, it use of a probability theory to evaluate results and including the measurement of sample risks, and also it permit the auditor to rely on smaller amount for an intensive checking that is representative to the large population, because even though we don't have to collect the whole population, okay, this is your population, but you collect only certain part of here, okay, or maybe certain part of here, but it is representative to all. This representative to all the population. Okay, defend measure at court, because it is very important, because it can be used as a for you to defend yourself in court, because you have done a very systematic approach of sampling. So no issue about you are not selecting a correct sample. So it's very important. Whereas non-statistical sampling is non-probabilistic or based on judgment. All right, is a sample approach that does not have above characteristic is considered as statistical sampling, when the auditor only use the judgment. Okay, they rely on his professional judgment rather than law of probability. Okay, the auditor may use non-random selections methods and require more subjectivity in making decision. Okay, so it based on his belief. Okay, how useful is that particular information, then they select that particular sample. So it's very we call judgmental based. Right, so there are several types of statistical sampling. So they can be categorized into attribute sampling, monetary sampling, and classical variable sampling. We go into detail about attribute sampling, monetary sampling, and also classical variable sampling in statistical sampling. What is attributable sampling? It is used to estimate the proportion of population that possess a specified characteristic. So example here is looking at the deviation rate. Okay, the most common use in the test of control, such as if the auditor want to determine the deviation rate of the rate of control, okay, implemented the accounting system. So I'll give you an example here. the auditor plan to check how often a credit check is not performed. Meaning that if it is not performed, it's deviate from a normal procedure. Before we have approve sales or credit, we need to have to check the credit standing of this of our client. So this is what you call a credit check. So our customer order before delivery. So here, when we see there is such a deviation, there's of normal procedure, that is where we are going to do more sampling on that particular deviation. This is what we call attribute sampling. Whereas monetary sampling it uses attribute sampling theory and techniques to estimate the amount of misstatement for class of transaction or account balance. Again, the key word here is the amount of misstatement. It is designed primarily to test the overstatement errors and most appropriately for low rate error population of the sample results. So again, is express a conclusion in monetary amounts, received dollar and cents. Example of accounting receivable, loans, investment securities, and they are all based on monetary amount. So here, this is monetary unit sampling. For example, if you have set your maturity level as 100,000, so your sample will be based on that 100,000 maturity set by you. So this is what we call a monetary unit sampling. Just now is what we have just now is attribute sampling. Alright, it's based on the deviation of the we call the event. Whereas this one is based on the monetary unit. The next one will be a classical variable sampling. We use normal distribution theory. This is what we call to evaluate the characteristic of population based on sample data. We should have equal chance of selection. This is determine the range using a computer audit software. It's no longer collection do they have done nowadays. So why is the purpose of this one is to estimate the amount of classes of accounting balance. So this is where you have a system maybe from the we call the population. The system will help you to identify the amount of classes of transaction of the accounting balance and determine the class of transaction that need to be audited or the possibility that particular transaction that materially misstated. So for example, like auditing accounts will have a large number of misstatement is expected, or inventory which significant audit difference are expected in the for test counts and pricing tests. So here you are using a system. Alright. When to use statistical sampling? When to use the statistical sampling? Decision whether to use statistical or non-statistical approach is matter of the auditor judgment. Again, it's based on the auditor judgment. Which system or which sampling method is more efficient to them? Alright. This is where we can use statistical sampling. The client accounting and internal control are reliable and effective. If they are reliable and effective, there you can use statistical sampling. If the population is very large, you audit a very big company, very complicated and big company, then you should use the statistical sampling. And then all item and population are homogeneous. They are almost the same criteria and everything. You can use statistical sampling. And all items in the population are identifiable and accessible. So you can get that information easily. So you can use statistical sampling. If you don't have this criteria, it's quite difficult for us to perform statistical sampling. There are several advantages of statistical sampling. Is design an efficient sample. It helps to design an efficient sample. It measures sufficiency of evidence obtained through these sampling techniques. It helps you to obtain the sufficiency of the evidence. So no issue about insufficient evidence. The system or the process itself helps you to identify the number of evidence to be collected. Quantify sampling risks because of select is based on a statistical theory. They can quantify the risks. It permits auditor to rely on a smaller sample. It helps to auditor to conduct the audit based on a smaller sample because it's been done statistically, and it permits auditor to conduct more extensive examination to a sample, because due to the small samples you can do some extensive examination, so we can examine at a deeper level. And then it helps the auditor to plan an audit approach in systematic and scientific manner. Again, it defend the measure of in court. Okay, if we don't rely much on judgment, so we based on the scientific calculation and everything, so therefore it is defendable in court. Okay, however, there are several disadvantages of sampling. One is due to the additional cost of training. We need to train the auditors. It's not that easy. And also sometimes we need to buy a specific software for us to conduct a statistical sampling. So again, there are pros and cons of using a statistical sampling. Whereas for non-statistical sampling, okay, it based on the judgment. Okay, sampling approach that doesn't have a characteristic considered as what you said just now, non-statistical sampling. Okay, why they use non-statistical sampling? Because part of the reason is due to the auditor needs to consider relationship between the cost of obtaining evidence and the usefulness of the auditor. So the cost benefit analysis need to be conducted here, whether it is how effective or how beneficial if you want to use statistical sampling as compared to the non-statistical sampling. Okay, for a small firm, maybe you don't have to use statistical sampling. Maybe you can use non-statistical sampling because it is more economical. And then again, look at the cost and time. Okay, so maybe it is more costly, more economically, or even more timely, or more efficient if you use non-statistical. Depend on what or when are you going to audit. Okay, however, there are some advantage of non-statistical sampling, because we will incur low training costs. The process of implementation is quite easy, and also adjustment is based on a quantitative analysis. All right, and then however there are several disadvantages, because training is quite difficult. There's no specific way, and then sometimes it's not standardized, therefore we have issue on consistency and uniformity, and of course a potential of litigation problems. Why? Because it's based on judgment, and we call the judgment of the auditors. There's no specific rules and regulations. There's no specific standard. It's only based on judgment, and it may prone to have an incorrect evaluation of sampling risks. So this is non-statistical sampling. Okay, however, there are some similarities. Again, one is of course, both sampling are selecting a sample. The process are selecting the sample. Of course, different approach, and then both is being used in the audit procedure, and also it also helps. Both are designing a process of designing the sample, and also it be used to evaluate the sample results. Okay, with both analysis and everything. These are similarities between statistical and non-statistical sampling. Okay, these are the differences maybe from what we are your understanding about what is statistical sampling and non-statistical sampling. You can see the difference. One is one is in terms of we call the need for the auditors to know the statistical formula for statistical sampling. However, for non-statistical sampling, is only based on experience and common sense. The results of statistical sampling is very objective, whereas non-statistical sampling is very subjective, because again, it's not maybe some sample is not represented the population, and it is based on judgment. Okay, the different auditor with the same approach will have the same answer because it's standardized, so the auditor will have the same answer. However, it is based on judgmental, may be different. Auditor might have different interpretation of certain results. And then it's very efficient method, then can delegate responsibility audit sample to lower rank of staff. Okay, you can use that to assign your staff to do, because very standardized. However, for non-statistical sampling, it's not that easy for you to assign them to critical staff, because the senior staff need to devise the sample. Okay, not the properly divide the sample is quite difficult. And then of course statistical sampling is defensible in court, but non-statistical is not dispensable. So as a whole, depending on how you what type of audit, what assess organization, and look at the background of the company or the test you want to conduct, you need to decide whether you want to use sampling, statistical sampling, or maybe non-statistical sampling. Depend on the choice and depend on the risk you want to and to take. Whatever the best among these are all the statistical sampling. But again, depending on what the approach that you are going to do. Okay, now there are several we call steps or application of audit sampling test. Okay, the first thing first is you need to regarding whether it is statistical or non-statistical, you need to follow this step. First thing is to plan the sample and design the sample size. Okay, maybe you want to sample only those we call a transaction more than 100,000 or 10,000 because due to the material level that you set, or maybe you set according to the invoice number. You can just plan what sample you are going to set, and then you select the sample. Okay, how do you select the sample? Maybe every 5. You're not selecting all, but this one is a population, but you're not selecting all. Maybe certain you use fractions, you use we call random selection or whatever you want to use. So then you test the sample. Okay, once you already select, you test, and then you evaluate the results. Okay, and then you make conclusion based on what you are going to do. This is a very common, this is a very standard test application of sampling in audit test. Of course, you plan what to sample, select the sample. Okay, plan what to sample, select the sample, test the sample, and evaluate. This is very common process. Okay, now here, when you plan the sample, is always look at the objective of your audit procedure. We have got through what are assertions, what are the audit objectives. So it's always based on the audit procedure. That is why your sample should be collected based on the audit procedure. You fail to collect the correct audit sample, you fail to achieve the audit procedure. It's very important. And your audit sample must represent the population. If you are actually the objective of audit procedure is to ensure, to check whether the sales, for example, if your audit procedure is to check whether your sales are completely recorded or not. Therefore, your sample should include all things related to sales, not other evidence. So it must be very focused on the audit objective. And then this is the step that you can do. You need to determine the audit objective, define what errors or deviation that can be that can happen. Okay, deviation are being sought, and then identify the population of sampling. For example, sales just now, what are the population? And then you can do stratification of sampling, whether you want to do every 5 or random sampling, and decide the sample size. This is other step, planning the sample. Okay, it's involved again just now, as I said just now, determining based on the other objective that you determine, and then what the error to be sought. Okay, and then again identify the population, and also you can use stratified sampling. These are the steps that you need to comprehend. Okay, now and then we decide the sample size. Okay, whether you want to use stratification of population and so on, or random sampling. Again, deciding what sample size. Okay, you can depend on what control. Then you select the sample size, whether you want to use statistical method or non-statistical method of sampling, depending on what the appropriateness of the sampling techniques that you are going to use. Okay, and then you can use random sampling, right? You can use random sampling or systematic selection. You can use that as well. Okay, depend on the detail. I think you have covered this in your statistic subject, so I don't need to go into detail what is selection, sampling, and so on. And also maybe can you have haphazard sampling, and then after that you can test the sample. Okay, you can do test the sample or perform audit procedure. Here we go into detail later how you do later on in the next chapter. We are going to go into detail the audit procedure. From the sample, you do a test of the sample on the substantive test, right, of the sample. Then we test the sample. It's always based on the audit objective, what type of test you are going to do. And of course, after that, we evaluate the results and analyze the cause of error and everything. So then later on, when you evaluate, and then evaluate the result, then after that, then we from that particular results, we come out with the opinion that you are going to give about the financial statement. So that is about audit sampling. Again, ladies and gentlemen, the key point here that we need to understand is you understand why we need to have audit sampling. Okay, and then why we need to have sampling, and then techniques of audit sampling, the technique audit sampling, so that you can have it a statistical or non-statistical, and again when to use them. Okay, it's very important when to use them, and then you need to know the steps, okay, or use of audit sampling in audit process. Okay, so thank you very much for your time. On hopefully I can see you again in the next chapter. So thank you very much. So I hope you can understand and comprehend what is meant by audit sampling and how audit sampling is be used in audit, and why audit sampling is important to auditors. Thank you very much and see you again. Bye. Okay, thank you.